Let's try this again. Kanda, Estrada, Tatun, Hazan, Sabar, Irgrits, Gatnos, Heratos, Amantos, Kanda! Finally! You know, when a movie is so reviled, you literally have to summon one from the depths of hell to obtain a copy, you know you're not in for a good time. Wait. Is this from Blockbuster?
And really, there's not much need to really even review this, aside from a personal promise to in the Patreon-requested Avatar reviews from earlier this year, as most critics on the net have made it a modus operandi of slamming its utter failure.
Then again, M Night Shyamalan's movies have been mocked long before the advent of internet reviewers by pretty much everyone, even in what was considered his heyday.
So they fly halfway across the galaxy in a highly advanced spaceship, but they don't use their technology to take over the planet. You know what their weakness turned out to be? Water. I mean, if that's true, why go to all the trouble to invade a planet that's 2/3 water? Not to mention the rain.
Why do you watch those movies if all you're gonna do is cut them up?
It's to the point I'm amazed he still even has a career. His record is films that are mixed to negatively received because they are overridden tripe, with no capacity to connect to the characters, slow monotony, little originality or imaginative vision, and are on the whole just not entertaining or become downright stupid. They assume they're clever, but are the kind of things which, if you put 2 seconds of thought into the script, the entire thing becomes insufferable. Especially his twists.
And the movie was made even more of a wreck than his standard direct due to the casting issues, mandates, and external story revisions, with Shyamalan purportedly refusing to make the film without Nicola Peltz, who was rumored to have been cast out of nepotism, but has never been proven, which of course leads to the casting of her character's brother, which spitballed into other crap. Slumdog Millionaire over here was cast because of a combination of that movie being popular, and realizing the cast of a culturally diverse source material was, in fact, too white. M. Night forgetting entirely that this movie was based on a television show that had enormous amounts of cultural diversity, despite him being from India.
Which is lacking here due to how they now had to cast the rest of the movie to match their starring actors ethnically, and then not overlap with the relevant groups they were supposed to. The Water Tribe is supposed to be based at Inuits, the Earth Kingdom on China, Fire Nation on Japan, and Air Nomads on Tibet and India. Meaning that, once again in a Hollywood film production with roles effectively gift-wrapped for them, Asian actors got intentionally screwed out of their roles. Thanks, M. Night!
And I'm not getting on that sarcasm. Much of this was entirely his doing, with the calls of racism being utterly dismissed, despite the only non-white roles in the film showing them depicted as either savage, evil, or otherwise uncultured. To quote an interview he made in his defense, "Anime is based on ambiguous facial features. It's meant to be interpretive. It's meant to be inclusive of all races. And you can see yourself in all of these characters."
First off, the reason you don't physically see much diversity from Japanese works, aside from hairstyle, is not their appearance is meant to be representative of everyone, but because Japan as a nation is pretty damn homogeneous. So it's easily noticeable when ones of differing nationalities do appear, and differing Japanese ethnicities are showcased, but their existence are often lost in dubbing. Strike one.
Second, the reason you can see yourself in the characters is because of one's ability to empathize and understand what someone is going through in the events of their stories through the means of how they are depicted, which may in some aspects parallel something you yourself have experienced.
Moreover, that is only made possible because in competently executed stories, those depicted in them come off as human beings. And while you can interpret someone's actions, the core aspect of the character are not open to interpretation. If you do not make someone reflective of the character they are based on in an adaptation, you fail outright. Strike two.
Third, Avatar is not an anime. I know there's discussion on this, but it was not made in Japan, its production staff were not Japanese, and it was not originally intended for a Japanese audience, nor has the cultural trappings expected of an anime. It has anime stylization and bases much of its setting and culture on various Eastern societies, cultures, and mythologies, but that is not enough to make such count as one. especially as it rarely to never uses the many visual tropes associated with anime. Thus, it is a Western cartoon based on Eastern Asia concepts. Nothing more.
So to use it being an anime as an excuse to disregard its showcasing of cultural diversity, that's the final straw. 3 strikes, you're out. I wish for you to step on Lego bricks barefoot for all eternity.
Ironically, with Noah Ringer, who played not Aang, well, that didn't really factor into why he was chosen at all.
As we kind of got an MMPR thing going here, where they cast someone with martial arts training because that would be heavily required for the role, and that is admittedly harder to come by, especially with the age brackets they needed to cast in. Problem was, he had no acting ability, and thus had to be trained to act. Which shows.
I give him credit for dedicating everything he could into the crash course he put himself through to do his job, also taking the time to learn several other forms of martial arts aside from the Taekwondo he had been trained in. So even with the general stigma of child actors being bad actors and thus difficult to work with from the lack of developed ability, it was very professional of him to put forth his best on all fronts to endeavor to meet the necessities of the part.
And looking back, none of what was wrong with the movie I find to be his fault, as he does show his skill throughout the film and his movements, and he is far from the worst child actor I have seen. And I do mean that as a compliment, as I have seen a lot of horrible child actors. It's just, the choreography and direction in the film is utter shit.
And mind you, I'm a guy who on a weekly basis sees and endeavors to showcase content featuring professional high-tier choreography. That is done on the budget of a television show. That a big-budget, $100 million film was completely incapable of getting anyone on with talent at all to man such efforts shows how much the entire film ran off of, we just didn't care.
Granted, not everyone is into mediums where they see such stunt work regularly, thus aren't always able to tell when such is done well, and when someone just phones such in. But an easy way to tell is in how fast and fluid the movements are.
In well-directed stunt work, while you may have trouble keeping up with the pace of the fight, when you play it back in your mind, you can see all of the telegraphed movements building to the culmination of the exchanges, all of which keep you engaged. In poorly directed or edited stunt work, you cannot follow each action as it keeps trying to be artsy, with the changing of angles or in how they use differing takes simultaneously, which cause the consistency of the actions to deteriorate so its flow is entirely lost, and the action becomes incoherent and thus unappealing. The Last Airbender film in turn takes the third route of pure amateurism, in how it constantly slows down the action, and not having the movements performed be followed by the effects they should result in. So the scenes themselves become tedious and boring, instead of exciting and awe-inspiring. In the series, what could be caused by one practice wave of one hand cannot even be shown happening after a character goes through an entire kata's worth of movements in the movie. As a result, it creates the fridge logic of, if it takes all this effort to call upon one's bending power, then why are benders not defeated by simple weapons they can just be stabbed or shot with?
And that's not even taking into account how all of the benders' powers have been massively weakened in the film. Normal firebenders cannot bend fire that is not burning from an existing source.
In fact, it is a line of dialogue where firebenders are shocked and awed, in how not Iroh sets himself on fire with no apparent ignition source at all. The concept of doing such without at the very least a torch is far beyond them. Forget Katara making rivers her bitch, her movie counterpart can barely hold a couple liters together. Something even Katara could do before the series even started. And everybody has riffed how it takes 6 earthbenders to move one stone the size of a guy's torso, when 6 guys in the cartoon could flip a fucking tank or construct/destroy a wall so enormous it would take a titan of pure muscle to penetrate Wall Rosa.
And I'm not asking for them to turn themselves into gods of this stuff. But again, I watch programming on a weekly basis that does this better on a made-for-TV budget. You can't fail more than that!
The last Airbender movie adapts between 7 and 9 episodes of the television show, and it does them absolutely horribly, starting with not Sokka and not Katara out hunting for food. On land, when their prey is out in the water, only for them to see something glowing under the ice, which then emerges because, despite seeing absolutely no one within the structure to infer it might not be dangerous, not Katara smashes it open, releasing not Aang.
Is it okay if you tell me your name?
The monks named me Ang.
That happens over a fifth into the movie. Yes, what possible dialogue could be more important than two characters meeting each other and exchanging greetings like human fucking beings?
I ran away from home. We got in a storm. We were forced under the water of the ocean.
Oh, I see.
It wasn't very smart.
You know, there's a reason your most successful movie is about a kid who sees dead people, dude.
Made worse in how they have all of the Avatar dialogue explaining who this kid is before they even give us his fucking name. As if his title and role is more important than the person. Something which shows that this movie entirely did not understand the motivation that caused Aang to run away in the first place, as it was that exact thing that had been subverted in the series by Katara and Sokka getting to know him before that was revealed, meaning they became attached to the person. Worse, the dialogue that tells us what the Avatar is longer than the exposition dump the show gave.
I mean, I know I can be long-winded in my recaps, but it's usually a means to an end in giving context to a material most people don't watch, read, or play before I feel comfortable giving my critiques, as then I feel my viewers understand my perspective better. But most of the dialogue in this movie is worthless.
To get your airbending tattoos, you have to meditate for long periods of time without losing focus. Some of the great monks can meditate for 4 days.
Yes, they just explained how someone meditates, an unnecessary detail since you can show that visually.
And to dig the hole deeper, right after explaining how someone meditates, not Katara then interrupts Aang's attempts to meditate, showing she did not listen to him in the slightest.
And you see that all over the film and how they fail show, don't tell, with a side order of, sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't pay attention.
But even when they show, there's constant, ever-present, unnecessary monotone narration which completely destroys appreciation of a scene. And it's not even in the voice of the characters or her perspective, as the narrator is not Katara, which can be used to inform them through such. It's entirely worthless dialogue. Anyways, Slumdog Millionaire, I'm not calling him Zuko, sees the light from not Aang's emergence from ice, and thus concludes he should attack the Southern Water Tribe's village, which does succeed in nabbing the brats, though there's no reason to take him over anyone else, just because he's dressed differently. After all, it's not like not Aang airbends, which is a tip-off to him likely being the avatar he's hunted. I mean, it's not like there's an avatar test they can perform.
Oh, you've got to be fucking kidding me.
And before people bring up the cartoons test to determine the avatar with the toys, that showcased evidence of the role of reincarnation which played into the avatar cycle, inferring the spirituality connection the avatar represents. Which, outside of some very random scenes with a dragon that is not Roku or his dragon partner, it's mostly a forgotten element, as is anything about Aang's morals, ethics, and the teachings of the air nomads, which are all reflective of Buddhist philosophies, most damning of which his distaste for and refusal to kill. Not Aang repeatedly being told that he should not kill, and needs to let go of any urges which would make one want to kill. A lesson he already knows, and is one of the central conflicts of character parts of his story. Literally the only way to miss this is to not have watched the series at all. To say nothing about how disrespectful it is to the underlying philosophies themselves.
We found that boy. He's our responsibility. We should fight.
Oh no, it can't be because you befriended him and have a history of the Fire Nation taking from you the important people in your life.
What would you do if they tried taking me away?
I'd kill them all.
See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It misses the mark entirely of what was needed to sell that. Moreover, that example is entirely out of context to her entire argument. From what was presented, not Aang is a stranger to them, and not Katara is arguing he should be treated as important as family. Without the emotional connection and argument, her desire to save him is completely without grounding.
And it takes revelation of him possibly being the Avatar, again, treating his role as a savior as more important than the actual fucking person he is, for them to try and go save him, only for that to be unnecessary.
Don't move! I have nowhere to run!
Glider. He has a glider. He can fly away from the ship. You see that visibly in front of you. You must be some form of imbecilic life form, as our scanning technology is not advanced enough to detect brains of such minuscule size.
This closes out the first act, with not Aang then heading home, with no one having told him 100 years have passed, expecting Monk Gyatso to be waiting for him.
He's the teacher responsible for me. He's kind of like my father.
Which is why he has never been mentioned at all.
This is Monkey Gyatso's. I made it for him.
And thus, why this scene does not work. Because you establish a connection literally before revealing his death, and not at all bothering to showcase the character at any point before this.
This scene really writes itself, since they show later they did do a scene with air nomad monks and not Aang. Instead of the siblings' grandmother and not Iroh explaining on the identity of the Avatar, have them skip past the Avatar exposition saying, not Aang is the Avatar. Then open the second act with them arriving at the Southern Air Temple and Aang flashing back to Gyatso, telling him what it means to be an Avatar while the two, do something to infer that pseudo-familial relationship. Cause otherwise, not Aang finding him dead is nothing but worthless assumed empathy, lacking in any real emotion or feeling toward these people or what they go through. The second act is thus mostly the group completely screwing around and skipping past events from the series. Most notably, the idiocy of the imprisoned Earthbenders that instead of being imprisoned in a metal structure that renders them powerless, as this was before the advent of metal bending, they're instead locked up in a quarry.
You really could not have rented a large metal boat, or set this all on a green screen and then mapped on the location. I mean, it's been reported that the use of green screen sets for later scenes played havoc with some of the actors. What's one more to not, undermine your own movie?
Credit where it's due, though. The consolidation down of the origins of the waterbending scroll not Aang and not Katara learned waterbending from is a fair means of simplifying things. And this now means they can do a montage consolidating events so they can showcase Aang kicking people's asses as they travel while they improve their ability to show them all as competent.
What a thrilling montage! I'm serious, that was it.
The only other side event in the second act was a visit to the Northern Air Temple, finding that a non-airbending monk had in fact survived to the modern era, and betrays not Aang to the Fire Nation!
What a twist!
I have lived in poverty because of your absence, Avatar, so you will understand my actions today.
Yeah, that clear disrespect for Buddhist philosophy and ideals that's presented in this movie, this is a bit more of an obvious showcasing of that, as the Tibetan monks of Buddha, which the air nomads are based on, do not seek material wealth. They intentionally live in a state of poverty as part of their monastic order. Now, admittedly, M Night Shallamalan is not a Buddhist. He is a follower of Hinduism, whose monastic order follow many of the same principles as there are quite a few commonalities between the two religions, meaning that still all applies. So, you created a throwaway air nomad character who betrays one of the last members of their tribe for wealth their entire philosophy does not value. Is there a term for religious racism?
And it's entirely unnecessary since all it facilitates is going through with the Blue Spirit rescue, which still could have easily been done had the Water Tribe siblings gotten injured in a fight and needed medicine, or a healer which would send not Aang off on his own and into the hands of Zhao, who is literally that awful and yet so much of an afterthought he's barely worth mentioning aside from how wrong they get his character and how he acts.
Do not kill the Avatar! He will just be reborn again!
No, but you see, they couldn't do that. After all, that would mean the Water siblings actually would have a reason to exist in the film.
Okay, I've been skipping over it, but Katara does absolutely nothing the entire film. She makes no convincing argument, does not influence any action or outcome, takes no action, or in fact the action she does take in no way cause what she wanted them to the point there would be no difference had she not been there.
At the very least, once they get to the Northern Water Tribe, not Sokka reiterates the subplot with Princess Yue, and actions of his facilitates exposition. It's bad exposition as it's ridiculously presented and it includes an inexcusable amount of unnecessary information, but at least there's an existing prompt for it.
Not Katara? Not a bit! She is absolute deadweight dumbass in distress. She does so much of nothing that you could cut her from the film entirely and literally nothing would change.
On every level, Nicola Peltz's depiction of the character is an insult to Katara, not just as a complex, compassionate, multifaceted individual, but in how the character in fact was the motivator for many of the events of the series. She is the one that uncovers Aang's stasis bubble, that told him of how time had passed, encouraged him to be the Avatar, mentored him on waterbending with the little experience she had. To reduce her to nothing but a hanger-on that does nothing, affects nothing, and plays no part in the story she's supposed to be the central part of, goes beyond simply disrespectful and borders on a downright sexist depiction. The same sexism, by the way, Katara in the show railed against.
Ironically, in many ways, Slumdog curb-stomping her in the final act is cathartic since, by this point, we don't see the character she was meant to be. We see a caricature we want to see have their ass handed to them so it can be recognized how much of a cheap knockoff they are. That's how bad it is, which is only made worse when you learn half of the bullshit with the casting is because of this actress. I am so glad this became her breakthrough role to an entire range of critically panned work. Nicola Peltz was in Transformers Age of Extinction. There's a reason I don't watch those movies.
And to swing back to the Blue Spirit subplot, that as well is entirely worthless to the story, as Slumdog has shown no complexity to his character or backstory to present why he would want to take in the Avatar himself. Neither a sense of duty, or to reclaim what he thinks is his lost honor, but is really the respected admiration of his bastard of a father. Even here, it misses the point. I showcased this scene earlier when I went over how bad the direction is, but yeah, it bears repeating. This is awful. It's clear they only included this sequence for the action scene presented from the Root episode, but the payoff is not worth it. Not only because it is in and of itself terrible, but the setup for it is so atrocious. But, less than an hour into a 105-minute film, we enter the third act and arrive at the Southern Water Tribe, which thus allows it to take up the last half of the film.
And I swear, we spend more time there in this movie than the show did. And yet, even less happens.
Primarily as they entirely cut Katara's subplot with her future step-granddad about him not training women and the Northern Water Tribe's traditions about training waterbenders, and also removed most of the short-lived romance between Sokka and Yue, with all that's there being at most one or two scenes with the actress for her and her disturbingly phallic hairstyle.
What? I'm not going to make a joke about it. Doesn't mean I can't remind people of it.
But sure enough, Zhao and his armada attack, and Aang seeks the assistance of the moon and ocean spirits, which he never once gets in contact with. Instead, we have another scene with the contextless, nameless dragon.
Please, tell me how to beat the Fire Nation.
Sure, let's skip entirely earning, training, building towards, or even planning a path to victory. Let's immediately skip to giving the answer and act as a deus ex machina to solve the problem for us. That is a fantastic lesson to teach moviegoers.
As the Avatar, you are not meant to hurt others.
Jin the Conqueror threatened to throw the world out of balance. I stopped him, and the world entered a great era of peace.
But you didn't really kill Jin. Technically, he fell to his own doom because he was too stubborn to get out of the way.
Personally, I don't really see the difference. I would have done whatever it took to stop Jin.
In mimicry of the show, Zhao invades the inner sanctums of the ocean and moon spirits, and in this version never actually learns where the fuck they are, and proceeds to kill the spirits.
The Fire Nation is too powerful to worry about children's superstitions, General Iro.
You're killing spirits to destroy the moon, which stops your enemy's powers from working. Your people manipulate the elements of the planet on a daily basis. Spirits and monsters are a fact of life for your entire culture.
You are made of stupid.
Well, after Iroh out of nowhere reveals that firebenders actually bending spontaneous fire is outside of the common bender rulebook.
You know, since the other tribes can do that, freely use any of their elements that are around them, and it's ridiculously easy for any of them to put out a standing fire that needs to be prepared in advance, with no way for the firebender to restore it after it's gone. How the fuck are the firebenders winning this war?
The ocean spirit just goes and gives everyone their victory with no prompting. Our heroes, ladies and gentlemen, they win the day by getting someone else to do it for them.
But when everyone bowed, I didn't bow back.
Well, Nanang, guess you're still fucking up, meaning you experience negative character developments. Fan-fucking-tastic.
This is easily among the top 10 worst movies I have ever sat through, and I can safely say this is the worst thing Paramount has been involved in making, after Star Trek Enterprise and Into Darkness.
The plot is one of the worst attempts to ever adapt any source material ever. The direction is atrocious, its depiction of the realm it's setting itself in is insipid, uninspired, and unimaginative. The casting was atrocious, and everyone gives a classically horrible M Night Shallamalan performance, all of which misses entirely the point and what was of merit of the material. It's not even enjoyably bad, it's boring, and yet at the same time, it's insulting.
I mean, is there anything that isn't awful and wrong with it? Well, actually, the guy playing Iroh isn't that bad.
While he still misses the mark of the character like everyone else, you at least see one that is mostly reflective of Iroh's persona, just without any nuance or picture of hidden motivations, nor the wisdom of the man, simply being the supporting, positive worrywart uncle that is, at the very least, a superficial image one can see of Iroh. Then again, Iroh presents himself mostly as a pretty simple man as opposed to the more conflicted and evolving leads that it's easy to get a read on who he is, but miss the nuance to why he acts that way, which made his transition to the film version better than the others.
Him and Noah Ringer really are the decent players amongst this travesty. For, like I said, at least Ringer shows the effort he puts into preparing for the role.
And yet, Nicola Peltz, the worst actor in the film, is the one that actually got a fucking career out of this mess. How ironic is that? Ringer, a supporting role in Cowboys vs. Aliens, another bad movie, but at least one that was stupid fun in my opinion. But the most showcasing of karma for her is the curb stomp battle with Slumdog beating her like a drum, as it's what the audience wants to do to her for ruining a fantastic, nuanced female character. Fuck this movie!
But here's the key to why this became so widely panned both critically and with commercial audiences, then so quickly forgotten. Everyone knew the show was nothing like this.
When I go off on something like the Tyson films or the Ryder reboot events, things that are popular because they utilize or base themselves on legacy heroes and offset any failing with excessively gratuitous action to compensate for how garbage their stories are, it's from the perspective of someone who watched the journeys of those original characters. Ones that, while are not forgotten, have had their tales removed from recent memory by decades, so fewer people clearly remember them to realize when something supposedly showcasing them is wrong, and disrespectful to that content. My words in those videos on them motivated by the endeavor to correct that misnomer, that attempt and failure to be representative of what they were, which can fester in modern popular consciousness to make that wrongness supersede any other belief about those characters, as I have seen that happen before.
But that is not what happened with this movie, as Avatar the cartoon was still in popular consciousness. The movie was made for the fans of the TV show. It was still airing reruns on Nicktoons. Everyone could call out and recognize what was wrong with it, not just because of the failings of Shallamalan as a writer and director, but because they had seen and knew how it had been done originally, could understand why it had been made popular and beloved, as it had been 5 years since the series premiered, and less than 2 since it ended. And no one wanted to see more of this depiction.
There have been long-running rumors of a Last Airbender 2 that keep popping up for some reason, but all of them fail to properly cite a source.
But personally, I believe that's not going to happen. At least not with anyone on it that was attached to this one. Shallamalan keeps being given other work. Why it confuses me. Nick clearly got sick of the property with how they tried to kill the Legend of Korra just as it was turning their protagonist into a not-awful person, and even if they went forward, far too much time has passed, meaning they'd need to entirely recast a sequel, and thus would run into the same problems this one did with trying to find the right actors.
To me, even though I'm not an active fan of the franchise, I feel the Avatar cartoon series is a good show. And all I can say to its credit that I haven't already is watch the series and avoid this god-awful film.
And with that, I can finally move on to something properly festive for the Halloween season next week. That'll certainly be more appropriate than this trash.